Welcome friends to this fourth lecture of week 10 of soil science and technology, and in this lecture we will be covering a very important topic, that is soil survey. And uh, we will be covering these following concepts in the soil survey, that is we will be first covering what is soil survey, and then what are the objectives of soil survey, what are the uses of soil survey, and what are the basic steps of soil survey, and different orders of soil survey, and then mapping procedure and practical difficulties which are present in soil surveys. So we talked about in our week 2 we talked about the soil classification, and how we can define different soil into different order, suborder, grade group, subgroup, then family and series. And the soil survey is basically the practical application of the soil classification knowledge, and soil survey is a technique that provides information on the spatial distribution of soil and their variation, obviously. And the soil survey of an area is expected to provide the answers to general questions such as, what type of soil are present in what proportion, secondly what is the type at any site of interest, and finally where can soil of a particular type or particular range of soil properties be found. So these are some important questions which you require for better and effective management planning. So for better and effective management of soil resources, you need to do soil survey. And remember that whenever you plan anything, whether you go for agricultural operation or whether you go for any engineering application, soil survey is must. Otherwise you cannot you cannot make a plan on which soil you are going to build anything, or you can do some further agricultural operations or any other management planning. So soil survey helps in getting these answers, and we'll see how this basically this soil survey works. So the objectives of soil survey, or or rather the broad general objectives of soil survey could be grouped as fundamental and applied. So there are two aspects regarding the objectives of soil survey. First of all, let us see the fundamental objective. The fundamentally, a soil survey helps in gathering information about the properties, genesis, classification and nomenclature of the soil. And applied aspect of soil survey includes interpretation of soil data for use in agriculture, forestry, recreational purposes, urban, industrial and pasture development, etc. So again, fundamental aspect says that a soil survey helps in gathering information about the soil genesis, and it helps in classifying the soil and then name that particular soil. For example, if you want to name the soil of any area, New Delhi area. So we need to do a soil survey, and then we need to properly identify the soil properties. Then we have to give them a particular name which will be used for indicating the soil of that area. And secondly, the applied aspect is when we do it and when we map the soil, obviously then it will be serving as a tool for selecting different land use patterns, like whether we want to use that soil, whether that soil is suited for agricultural purpose or forestry purpose or recreational purpose or industrial and pasture purpose. So these all type of answers you will get when you will have a map of soil survey. So these are basically objectives, you can say, of soil survey. Now what are the uses of soil survey? Obviously they provide the information for the development of land use plans for both arable and non-arable lands, and for predicting the long term effects of a particular land use environment. Secondly, they help in predicting the adaptability of identified soil to various uses, and also their behavior and productivity under defined sets of management practices. So obviously they also they also soil survey also helps us to identify the adaptability of soils to various land uses. And thirdly, soil resources inventory helps in recognizing the areas having constraints like salinity, alkalinity, acidity, erosion, waterlogging, flooding, and also taking suitable measures for their management. So, it is very much important for identifying different problematic soils and their subsequent management. Finally, soil information generated through soil survey is useful for land settlement, tax appraisal, locating and designing highways, airports and other engineering structures. So, you can see both for arable and land and for non-arable land, both for agricultural purposes and non-agricultural purposes, engineering purposes, industrial purposes, you can use this soil survey, and it has got a very vast application domain, I would say. So, let us see what are the basic steps in making the soil survey. The first step is mapping of the soil. So, this is very important. So, mapping of the soil is very important. This is the first step, and obviously characterization of the mapping units. We will be discussing about the mapping units in a couple of slides. And then once we characterize the mapping units, then we have to classify the mapping units. So, so again the first step is the mapping of soil, second is characterizing of the mapping units, third is the classification of the mapping units, fourth is the correlation with other soil surveys. So, basically once a team of soil scientists completed a soil map, and the map is reviewed by other soil scientists to verify that the soil boundaries match those mapped and adjacent areas, and that the characterization of the classification of mapping units are consistent with the other soil surveys. So, it is a kind of validation practice in the soil survey. Fourth and the fifth one is interpretation of the soil suitability for various land uses. So, a report is written to accompany the soil map in order to describe the suitability of each mapping unit for various land uses, and the interpretive tables of the report often reflect many person year of experience and observations, as well as standard interpretation of measured soil properties. Now, this interpretation is very important because it requires a long time, dedication, and as well as expertise for interpreting this type of soil and as well as soil mapping units, and then identifying what is the best suitable practice for that soil mapping units. And organization obviously of all these soils information to make it available to users in the form of maps, tabular information and electronic data files. Obviously, most of these things have been already done in advanced countries like US, and the work is on progress in India. So, again these 6 steps: first of all mapping of the soil, second is characterization of the mapping units, third is classification of the mapping units, fourth one is correlation of the others with other soil surveys or kind of validation, fifth one is the interpretation of soil suitability for various land uses, and sixth one is the organization of all these soil information. So, these are the basic steps of making the soil survey. And if you see the diagrammatic view or schematic view of soil survey methodology, obviously it starts with the different data sources. So, you can use either satellite data to create a base map, and also you can use some ancillary data like topo maps and reports etc. as a base map. So, topo maps also can be used as a base map, and then you can use the visual interpretation. After the visual interpretation, pre-filled physiographic units you can develop, and from there ground truth collections, and ground truth collection is mainly done for the verification of the physiographic units and soil profile studies and collection of samples and soil analysis and soil classification. So, we need to actually go to that area and collect some soil samples so that we can verify whether we are correctly identifying the properties of the soil for that point. And then once we do that, physiographic soil relationship will do, and finally finalization of the soil maps and legends, and ultimately producing the final soil maps. So, it starts again with the satellite data and ancillary data, then we do the visual interpretation, and then pre-filled physiographic units we develop, and from there we do the different types of ground truth collection, and then physiographic soil relationship we develop, and we then finalize the soil maps and legends and produce the final soil map for subsequent use by different stakeholders. So, these are basically steps of of soil survey methodology, and we will discuss them in details later on. So guys, let us talk about the base maps. Now base maps are the major are the starting points of soil survey obviously. Now there are four types of base maps we will be talking about here. Let us start with the cadastral maps. Now the cadastral maps on the are basically done on the scale of 1:2640, where 24" equal to represent 1 mile, to 1:7920, where 8" represents 1 mile in plain areas, and 1:1200, where 52.8 inches equals to 1 mile. So in hilly areas and are used for detailed mapping. And cadastral maps show field boundaries and field revenue survey number. However, you can see here these are the cadastral map units, and they are basically they basically shows field boundaries and field revenue survey numbers. So we are getting some numbers and we are seeing some boundaries here. However, they lack topological details like contours, elevation, etc. So these information we cannot get from cadastral maps. And can remember that again these cadastral map can be used as a best map for doing the soil survey. Second is topographical map. Now topographical maps are published on the scale of 1:25,000 or 1:50,000 or 1:250,000. So these are basically used as a base map for various soil surveys in India. And topographical maps or topo maps shows physical features and contain topographical details also in the form of contours and elevations above the mean sea level for Survey of India benchmark. So you can see these are the topo maps, and you can see the contours showing different types of topological features, different elevations, and these are very efficient base maps for creating the soil survey. So we have discussed about these two important base maps, again the cadastral map as well as topographical map. The third one is aerial photographs. Now the aerial photographs ranging in the scale from 1:8,000 to 1:60,000 and are basically used in different types of soil surveys. And successive photographs contain 50 to 65% of the overlap, which is essential for stereoscopic viewing and analyzing of the stereo pairs. So basically what happens, we generally there are low altitude flights, and these low altitude flights can take these images from a certain distance above the earth's surface, and these are basically used as an aerial photographs. These aerial photographs you can see here, these aerial photographs are basically used as a base map for further soil survey. And finally remote sensing, you can see these are remote sensing data. These remote sensing photographs are basically taken by different types of satellite platforms, and these remote sensing maps are also produced as a base map for creating the further soil survey. And remote sensing has become a very important aspect of soil survey nowadays, and we will discuss them in our next lectures also. So the soil survey can be divided into several orders. Actually, the soil survey can be defined in 5 different orders, starting from first order, then second order, then third order, fourth order, and fifth order. So let us see them. So type of survey scale is basically varying from first order to fifth order. So you can see first order is basically very intensive, and it generally takes the scale of 1:1000 to 1:15,000, and the second order is basically called detail, where the survey scale is basically 1:12,000 to 1:32,000. Then semi detailed is the third order, and here the scale is 1:20,000 to 1:65,000. The fourth order is called the reconnaissance soil survey, which varies from 1:50,000 to 1:300,000. And in the fifth order is also known as the reconnaissance, where the survey scale varies from 1:250,000 and 1:10 million, you can say here, 1:10 million. So size of mapping units also vary from fifth order to first order. Obviously, in case of fifth order, the size, the area is quite large. It varies from 2.5 to 500 square kilometer, and in fourth order it varies from 15 to 250 hectare. In third order it varies from 15 to 1.5 to 15 hectare. Second order it is more detailed, that is 0.5 to 4 hectare, and in the first order smaller than 0.5 hectares. So, it is a more detailed you know detailed soil survey, and typically components of map units are basically in individual map units. We will be talking about the map units. Map units are the individual polygons which are present in the map, in the soil map, and these polygons or map units are basically composed of these orders, suborders and grade groups in case of fifth order. In case of fourth order, they mainly consist of grade group, subgroup and families. In the third order, it mainly consists of family, series and phases of series, and second order it basically contains soil series, phases and series, and first order it basically contains phases of soil series. We will discuss what is the phase of soil series. And kind of map unit, obviously association in case of fifth order, some consociation and differentiated group. We will discuss this thing. And in case of fourth order, there is an association and some complexes consociation. In case of third order, association or complexation. So, you can see in case of first order, it is mostly consociation and some complexes. So, you can see as we are going from fifth order to first order, it is becoming more detailed, and obviously different types of remote sensing sources we are also using. Up to fourth order, from up to fourth to fifth, up to fifth order, starting from the second order to fifth order, we can use the Landsat thematic mapper digitized data for from remote sensing sources. Spot image digital data can be done up to first order, and high altitude aerial photography we can do from first order to fourth order, and low altitude aerial photography can be done only from first order to third order. And use of soil survey land use planning, obviously fifth order and fourth order are useful for resource inventory, and from fourth order to third order are for project location. Feasible surveys are first feasible surveys can be done from third order and second order, and management surveys can be done using first order and second order. So, this basically table shows how different orders of what are the different orders of the soil survey, and how they can cater the cater to the different needs, and how they are differing in their size, how they are differing in their attention to details, and what are their usefulness. So, what is the mapping unit? So, soil map unit are designed to efficiently deliver soil information to meet user needs for management and land use decisions. So, map units can appear as individual areas like polygons. You can see it is an individual polygon here, which is denoted by RR1, then LV2, then LV1. So, these are individual map units, and these are basically polygons, points or lines on a map. So, a map unit is a collection of areas defined and named the same in terms of their soil components. So, each map unit differs in some respect from all others in a survey area and is uniquely identified on a soil map. So, there are certain important terms which you need to define. First of all, soil phase. We talked about different soil phases while discussing these different orders of soil survey. So, soil phase, although technically not included in the class of soil taxonomy, as a class in soil taxonomy, a phase is subdivision based on some important deviations that influences the use of the soil, such as surface texture, degree of erosion, slope, stoniness or soluble soil content, etc. So, thus a sessile sandy loam, for example, this is a soil series. So, sessile sandy loam 3 to 5% slope and a Hagerstown silt loam stony phase are example of phases of soil series. Okay. So, when you are adding some more characteristics or more features in the soil series, then we are calling it soil phase, because here you can see sessile sandy loam 3 to 5% slope. So, adding with this 3 to 5% slope, making it is a soil phase or phases of soil series. Now, the second important term is consociations. The smallest practical mapping unit for most detailed soil survey is an area that contains primarily one soil component. Furthermore, that component is comprised mainly of only one phase of the named soil series. So, for example, a mapping unit may be labeled as the consociation like Saybrook, silt loam 2 to 5% slope moderately eroded. So, these are consociations. Okay. So, now you differentiate between soil phases and consociation. The third one is soil complexes. So, soil complexes, sometimes, contrasting soils occur adjacent to each other in a pattern so intricate that the delineation of each kind of soil on a soil map becomes very, very difficult. Again, when the soil with contrasting, characteristics occur side by side in a pattern so intricate, so it is very difficult for us to differentiate these soils, then we call it soil complexes. And in such cases, a soil complex is indicated on a soil map and the explanation of the soil present in the complex is contained in the soil survey report. Obviously, in the soil survey report, we give the explanation. The fourth one is the soil association and broader classes. Obviously, relatively large scale soil maps like third order maps may display only soil association. So, basically these are general groupings of soil that typically occur together in a landscape and could be mapped separately at larger scales. And mapping units in fourth and fifth order surveys with scales smaller than 1 is to 1 lakh usually can 1 is to 10 lakh can usually show only broad classes of soil such as the dominant soil order, suborder and grade group present in delimited areas. So, you can see in this picture these are basically soil association by texture, and so you can see these are the soil association is basically soil association is basically basically general groupings of soil that typically occur together in a landscape and could be mapped separately as a larger scale. So, these are the 4 important points. So, another important point is the undifferentiated group. Undifferentiated groups are these are the units which consist of soil that are not consistently found together. So, but they are grouped and mapped together because their suitabilities and management are very similar in common land areas. So, these are called undifferentiated groups. So, in this slide basically shows the early days of soil survey, and obviously remember that whatever soil survey we are doing here in India, we are basically following the United States Department of Agriculture or USDA soil survey, which started long back in 19th centuries. And you can see a couple of pictures where they are used the traditional methods of soil survey, and obviously at that time more emphasis was given to the geological context rather than the soil characteristics. And you can see how they were used different types of base maps, they did some interpretation for cropland. And the last picture shows the 1922 reconnaissance soil survey in Texas by USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, which are responsible for this is the organization, this Natural Resource Conservation Service, who are responsible for delineating the soil survey or undertaking the soil survey in United States, and we are basically following their guidelines in India also. So, let us see what are the several steps of soil mapping, soil survey mapping procedure. So, preliminary, in the first step we do some reconnaissance of the area to investigate the major soils and their pattern of occurrence, and this is the first step. The second step is procurement of required base maps like aerial photographs. We procure it from different sources, aerial satellite imagery, topographical maps or other maps. So, and then third we generally prepare the mapping legend based on the preliminary field studies. So, again first of all we will do some preliminary reconnaissance of the area to investigate the major soils of their pattern of occurrence. Second, we buy some base maps like aerial photographs, satellite imagery, topographical and other maps. These are expensive and we buy it from different sources. Third one is preparation of the mapping legends based on the preliminary field studies. So, after the preliminary field studies we make the the mapping legends, Then we do the stereographic study of aerial photographs and interpolation of satellite imagery or interpretation of satellite imagery or digital for the identification delineation of the landforms, and we want to identify these landforms like hills, valleys, terraces, floodplains, coastal plains and sand dunes, and their subdivisions based on the difference of in their tones and relief and vegetation. So, this is the fourth step. The fifth step is basically so these are the fourth step. The fifth step is basically the soils are examined at some standard interval along the along the traverse to locate important differences in their properties, and then we further plot the soil boundaries. So, once we plot the soil boundaries, then we do classification of the soil and naming of the map units based on the morphological, physical and chemical properties of the soil forming the map unit, and finally we do the preparation of the final legends and finalization of the base map, finalization of the soil unit. So, these are the sub of the steps which are important for soil survey and mapping procedure. Remember that these consist of several steps, and each of the steps for doing this for executing these steps indicates a long time experience, and the people who does this type of survey are called the pedologists and the soil survey experts, and they have the capability of delineating each and every feature of the soil, and they have the capability of preparation of the soil map in a most suitable way. And so, guys, what are the different features we generally examine while describing the soil profile? Obviously, each horizon, when we go and we collect the soil sample for ground truthing, what are the parameters which we consider for classification of the soil and delineating the soil map units? These are the features we generally consider as a soil scientist. First of all, the horizon symbol, then the depth of the each horizon in layer in earth centimeter, then soil color under wet, moist and dry conditions, and also mottling. So, mottling is basically soil when it indicates the periodic iron reduction and oxide deoxidation. So, that shows some color. Here you can see the special mottled color of the soil. So, we call it mottled soil, and this mottling is an important feature in describing the soil profile. And finally, the soil texture and then soil text structure, we have already discussed this in our previous lecture, and then soil consistency under dry, moist and wet condition, and then cutons. Cutons are basically pet coatings due to the process of eluviation, and then pressure phases and slicken slides. We have already covered the slicken slide while we discussed the vertisols in our soil classification lecture, and then different types of nodules and concretion of cementation. You can find different types of nodules and concretions, especially from some carbonates and some other compounds, also secondary accumulations. Then contents of carbonates and soluble salts. We have if you remember, we have divided different types of subsurface horizons or endopedons based on this secondary accumulation of carbonate soluble salt like salic, gypsic and all these things, calcic. So, if you remember those things, so these type of features we are also looking for while describing this individual soil for ground truthing, and also whether there is a presence of root, where what are the nature of boundaries with the horizon below, and then what is the pH, what the hard, if there is a formation of hard pans. Hard pans generally formed due to the movement of due to different heavy implements as well as different other practices. Then pores, what is the percentage of pores, then is there presence of artifacts, and then features of biological origin. So, all these are taken into account while describing any particular soil profile. You can see how a pedologist dig up a soil and actually define each and every layer and identify what are the important properties of this each and every layer for proper validation of the mapping units, and also based on this they name that soil and they create the proper mapping units of that soil. So, what are the practical difficulties of in soil survey? Obviously, the distribution of the different soil may be so complex in a field, or may occupy to so small areas that their delineation on a map at any practical scale become very difficult. And secondly, it is difficult to follow the geographic boundaries of the soil because of the vegetative cover and their hidden nature. Secondly, soil survey and thirdly, the soil survey and mapping are expensive, and many developing nations may not afford them unless they serve the practical needs. And finally, the inaccessibility of certain areas because of transportation problem may restrict the number of sampling points. So, these are some practical problems or difficulties in the soil survey. So, guys, I hope that you have learned about this soil survey, and let us wrap up this lecture here, and we'll meet in the next lecture to discuss our final topic of week 10, that is the use of remote sensing in soil survey. So, thank you, and let us meet and to discuss this thing in the next lecture.